So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. We're going to do a long form video on alignment and just talking through. Now, I promise you that this is a new conversation. So we're trying purposefully to tread some new ground here. This isn't just going to be, as Jeff calls it, dunking on alignment and saying yes or no, but really exploring some new thoughts. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of call shenanigans on, I think it's important for us to look at what alignment is now. And here's what I mean. I mean that when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, any edition, it's unfair to bring holdover rules in any edition to another edition. So I think that to start the conversation, we have to actually go through and say, okay, what is alignment in 5th edition? And so based on the 5th edition rules, this is exactly what they describe alignment as. And I want to start out with that as the baseline control group so that we don't just talk about what our concept of alignment is, because there's been a lot of iterations and a lot of additions. So specifically, what we're talking about today is alignment. A typical creature in the game world has an alignment. And what this does is it broadly describes its moral and personal attitudes. Alignment is a combination of two factors. One identifies morality, which is good, evil, or neutrality, and the other describes attitudes towards society and order, so lawful, chaotic, or neutral. Thus, there are 9 distinct alignments that define those possible combinations. Now, then the book goes on, or in this case, D&D Beyond goes on to describe brief summaries of the 9 alignments that talk about the typical behavior. This is key, though, and I feel like this is a sentence that's often omitted when we sort of pass on the concept of alignment verbally rather than reading the rules. Individuals might vary significantly from that typical behavior, and few people are perfectly and consistently faithful to the precepts of their alignment. And I feel like that's really, really important going in and saying, I think 5th edition saw some problems with previous editions, but because so many times we just go into the new game and we're like, hey, what are the rules that have changed that I need to know? And I just don't think this is one that comes up. So, rules as written, alignment is fluid. And I just wanted to start off by saying that and then kind of throw it to you guys.
I think what you've brought up is an interesting point because there are a few rules specifically in 5th edition that people talk about a lot and they have their own preferences on. But they're often but they're often incorrect about like that alignment. So I didn't actually know it specified that individuals can vary. And that's important because just like inspiration, you can only ever have or not have inspiration, but a lot of people, count them up, say. For some reason, it's a rule I don't feel like a ton of people feel like they need to read, or if they do, it just doesn't stick with them. Because so often I do feel like people are so strict on alignment, where no, if you are this alignment, you're that. Or, they think that alignment isn't a good thing for the game because, well, no, because nobody could ever just be one alignment. But again, the rules in this case support the fact that, well, there's a lot of room to play there. The reason that's important to me is because alignment in general has a place in the game. And a lot of times when people have a problem with it, they elevate it to a place that the rule is not supposed to be. I think alignment is good for some things. For example, as far as I know in 5th edition, but certainly in older editions, you had to be a specific alignment to have paladin powers. I don't necessarily agree completely with that idea, but that's a good example of a mechanical reason that alignment would exist. Something I don't agree with is, say, a trap that goes off that could change your alignment. I think something like that exists. I'm sure somebody's come up with it before. The reason that's weird is because that's like saying that I could, cast a spell on you, Jeff, and your personal, like, real life alignment would change. But it doesn't work that way. There's so many things tied into that moral alignment and your attitudes that there's no way to just quantify it as one thing. So it's dangerous that so many people distill it to that one thing. Well, no, you're lawful good, so you have to, But for some reason, it comes up so often.
Well, can I just say something before you go, just real quick, and just say, I know for a fact that there's a trap that changes your alignment. It's called you're texting in front of me and we both missed the green light. And that makes my alignment change like this.
So fast.
It is a trap, and it is the realest thing that's ever happened. So go ahead, Jeff. Please continue.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, first off, they actually did change in 5th edition mechanically that paladins don't have to be a certain alignment, that you can be a paladin of any alignment. But that is a change that they specifically had to make, where in other editions, it was like only lawful good, unless you were an evil paladin, in which case it was like only chaotic evil or something.
Yeah.
I don't know like the exact specifics, but yeah, I think that it's the fact that people can change and like operate within a spectrum of behavior that might not be consistent with any one alignment. I think it's really important to sort of separate a descriptive approach to alignment versus like a prescriptive approach to alignment, which is I think what James you were kind of getting into, of like, if you go, I have to behave in this way because I am this alignment, then you are looking at it backwards. You've put the cart before the horse, where it should be, this is the behavior my character is exhibiting, and that behavior fits within this certain cloud of alignment. Like, these behaviors are lawful good, therefore right now I am calling myself lawful good, rather than saying, because I am lawful good, I have to do this or I have to do that. And I think that that's where a lot of GMs and even some players can get really into binds, where a player will say like, oh, I'd like to do this. And the GM will be like, oh, well, actually, you're lawful good. And that action is really more of a chaotic sort of thing. So I don't know that your character would really do that. And it's like, that to me is completely the opposite way around of how you should be using any of these sorts of systems. Of the player and their character will do what their character is going to do, you know, and that you can at least remind them of like, hey, I just want to let you know that, you know, you're calling yourself this and you're acting in this way. But I don't think the solution is to change the behavior. I think the solution is to change the label, if you're going to use those sorts of labels, and kind of let the label move with how the character's behaving, and describe how they've been acting, rather than like using it as a formula that you have to follow in order to be playing that character right, which I think is not the way that it should be used. And I think that's where it can get really stifling and really restrictive in how it acts on a character, if you're constantly trying to follow a label that you think you need to fulfill, rather than doing what actually feels right for the character you're playing, and then letting the label, you know, be what it will following that.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really strong way to put it, is that, you know, let me say it this way. And this is it's the same question that I feel like I ask all the time, but I feel like it's the question, which is, what's the heavy G, baby? What's that big fat heavy G? What's the goal? What are you trying to do? And as a game designer, I'm like, all right, here's the rule, and this is what it is. I feel like at the end of the day, I think we want to play characters that we think are fun, and that we want guidelines to take ourselves out of it a little bit and try to role play and try to be like, well, no, how can I get in the mindset of this character that is unlike me? Well, if I build a framework, this sort of invisible box of choices, that makes it easier for me so that I can think, well, no, what would, you know, Grok the hammer do? And I think that's the goal. So how can we do that same thing and give people that same sort of invisible box without it being such a, like you're saying, it's like this rigorous set of, oh, no. Grok can't make that choice because Grok decided that this was his label. You know what I'm saying? So what's the flip? What's the good way? How do I still get that? And what is the goal? What's the goal of alignment? I just want to tread some new ground here, you know?
So to me, you bring up an interesting point, because I have the sort of best non-answer.
Give me that heavy G, baby.
That heavy G. So to me, the goal of alignment is, it's sort of a meta identifier that makes more sense applied to some monsters and creatures, because it gives you a rough idea of how they might act. As long as you remember that it is that fluid, and that you can have a very, especially if it's an intelligent creature, you can have, I think a Rakshasa is like, in 5th edition, is specifically like more toward evil. But I don't personally feel there's any reason you couldn't have one that was good. And I bring that up because if you remove it from the rules entirely, most players have the best thing, which is their own brain to decide. I'm Grok the Hammer, and usually Grok the Hammer, say, doesn't really like authority that much. He's not really, about the rules as much as his own personal compass. But today, Grok the Hammer shows up and he meets somebody that exemplifies his sort of principles, but is also in a place of power in a very structured government or some sort of thing. Where Grok the Hammer now realizes, wow, it can be, what I like, that really working from the gut, but in a structured way. So as a human with our brains, we can go, oh, well, today Grok the Hammer feels X. Because you can kind of just imagine how your character would feel, right? So instead of the labels or the rules or any of that, if you're just trying to make decisions as your character, we do that every time we play role-playing games. We say, based on that new information, I think my character would do X. And I don't think there's any reason to apply any rules to it or to say you can or can't do it because of how you acted last week. If you're playing humans, and in this case, humans or intelligent creatures that act, enough for all intents and purposes like humans, if you're making decisions as them, it's up to nobody but you to say, no, they wouldn't do that because they are currently doing it,
Yeah, and talking about goals with alignment can always get very fuzzy, just because I think it's something that like every person who uses it has kind of a different aim for how and why they apply those different things, which can lead to kind of another problematic area of alignment, which is like using alignment as a justifier for being a bad player, to basically let you do annoying, bad, disruptive game actions because it's fitting the label that you're trying to achieve. So like, for example, the rogue who constantly is stealing from party members, getting them into trouble, lying because he's chaotic neutral, and that's what chaotic neutral is. It's being out for yourself and spicing things up or whatever. And it's just like that person is using the alignment as a goal to basically deflect being a troublesome player onto the rules and the character that they're playing instead of like owning it as the player. So it's like for them, the aim of alignment is very different from like, say, someone like, some of the people that we usually play with, where it's like, no, I'm trying to like portray an ideal that this character is striving to, uphold and to detail their flaws and their personalities in an interesting way. So it's like the goal, I think, can be very variable, which is part of what gets, I think, some people into trouble, is like how you use it. Are you using it as a weapon or as a shield or as a tool? And I think that's something that's very important to try to figure out. I think it's different, for most people.
Yeah. And so something that you said, and this is a trigger for me, which is I'm calling dirty hot dog on neutral. And so I'm just trying out a new word for shenanigans. So because if you're grilling out,
I call shenanigans on dirty hot dog.
Yeah.
Now you, sir. No, if you're grilling out and you drop a hot dog and it's dirty.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I didn't know if you meant dirty like has dirt on it or dirty put relish and jalapenos.
Not like a New York.
See it being a moniker. Yeah.
Not a dirty water dog, but like you just imagine that beautifully grilled hot dog, and I go to put it on the plate. Hot dogs, by their nature, roll. And it rolls off the plate, and it never falls anywhere great. It falls in the sand. And so I'm like, you don't wash that hot dog and you eat it, that's a dirty hot dog. So I'm calling dirty hot dog, crunchy sand teeth on neutrality is just something that doesn't exist in our world in many cases, because to thrive, survive, you have to go against your instincts to be neutral as a rule. There are things that people are neutral on, but that doesn't. I don't believe you can have substance of character and be, I'm neutral. It's like, okay, so then how did you choose what to wear? And maybe that's not your thing. I don't care what I wear. But there's something in there that you're not neutral about, or else you'd be in bed. You wouldn't be up adventuring. By nature of someone who is going out, pressing into danger and the unknown, you have to have belief in something. And so that's the one thing that I would call dirty hot dog on is I think neutral as an alignment is only a place you can step into momentarily in certain instances, but it's not home base. I don't think, personally, and I could be swayed, but I think that this has to do with, So what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, where it's like neutrality in most cases. I won't say in every single case, but in most cases, neutrality and inaction are inseparable from each other, where it's like the things that you're neutral on as a person are the things that you don't care about, and therefore you'll do nothing to influence one way or the other because it's not important to you. But you can't have everything be not important to you. There's got to be some part of you that cares about something, and that care is always going to drive action, and that action is going to require decision, and that decision is going to necessitate picking a side of whatever that decision is going to be. So there's, I think, a degree to which you have to be, like you say, some things you might not care about, genuinely. You just, whatever happens is whatever, and I don't care. But you can't build a whole character around that. Like, there's just nothing to work with there. Like, you need to have something that drives you, and that drive is always going to require a goal and a decision that has to be made, which must then automatically separate you into, neutrality or other, away from neutrality and towards an aim of some sort.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And I think that further highlights the idea that alignment was created for a reason at some point. And what you called it earlier, Tim, it's sort of a holdover rule that's made it into every edition because there are reasons for it to exist. But again, I feel like people apply things to the rule that aren't necessarily correct or don't apply. And then even further, that because it's the rule, it's the abstraction they went with. Another way to put it would be, so that neutrality where I think it exists is in, say, a wild animal. A wild animal, I don't think as humans it's easy for us to do this, and I don't claim for this to necessarily be scientifically correct, but the way I imagine a dog's thoughts, an animal that is generally intelligent enough to be trained, but not intelligent enough to, say, speak or have thoughts maybe the same way we do, I imagine it's a lot like there's a little conversation going on where an animal goes, I need food. Okay, that means we hunt. They have no feelings for the animal they're killing to eat. They need to hunt and eat, right? They're literally neutral in that sense. I don't feel like an animal or some creature without intelligence could be good or evil. I don't think that you could have a good, in that sense, dog that's like, no, this dog stands for everything that's right and feels the law should be followed. It has no concept of any of those things. So to me, neutrality is more something that fits with, like, it doesn't have an alignment because it's not smart enough, right? But because, like you said, that's the only way. There are creatures that can't make a decision. They don't know what they want to wear today except for what their instinct tells them. But yeah, in humans, it doesn't make any sense because, like you said, specifically tying it with inaction, Jeff, and furthermore, I feel like knowing enough about the situation to realize that you are better off not having an opinion on it, right? So this is a very measured thing. You likely have a belief on whatever this subject is. But you're saying, you know what, I don't think now's the time for me to bring it up. I'm going to remain neutral because I don't want to be in between these two people fighting, which would be the best example. So again, it's just the real life is a lot more nuanced than the 9 alignments would imply. And it's important to remember that when we're using alignment in our games.
Yeah, and I feel like, so where it is really handy, and you mentioned it at the beginning of what you mentioned, and then when you hit on it and using the dog example, it's actually really fitting. Alignment is super helpful with monsters. Because I can see, and I don't know the real history, but I can see you come across a monster. It's old school D&D. Everything's trying to kill you. You're poking every 5 feet with a pole because the dungeon master's trying to make you die. Different world. I can see a rule like that popping up because you're kind of like, okay, are you saying that every creature in the world is just constantly trying to kill us? So, and even in, like, I know for a fact there's a blurb in the monster manual that's different than what is in the standard alignment manual. And it's basically like, yo, these are clues to how the monster behaves. That's the actual word. It says, yo,
Yo.
Signed, Chris Perkins, Chrissy P. But it's basically, this is a clue to its disposition so that you can have an idea as a game master what we were going for when we wrote this monster. So it gives you some ideas, especially in combat, like how would a monster act? So a chaotic evil monster is not going to be someone that you can reason with easily. So that gives you as a game master just some, so okay, cool, here's some rules and some guidelines. Whereas like a neutral monster, I think that could work. A neutral monster, James, is what you said. It's a creature. It's a dog or whatever that's just food, shelter, kind of the basics. That might be reasoned with. You could tame that animal. So it actually says, and this is interesting, some creatures can have any alignment, but there are also some creatures, James, it actually says in the rules, like what you just said, they're of low intelligence to the point to where they don't make ethical choices. The dog's not like, you know what? My master's been really good to me. I think I'm gonna clean this area of the house. Really just show them what's up. So anyway, I know I just said a lot about alignment and monsters, but I wanted to cap it off by saying this thing, which is I think a way that alignment can actually work well is if you think about it as being a preference. It's like, this is where I feel most at home. This is where I feel kind of myself. But in storytelling, conflict happens when things go wrong, and that's what a story is. So if I were going to use alignment, I would use it in the way that James, that you mentioned. I would say, hey, this is going to be lawful good. I'm going to choose a lawful good character. This is where I'm most comfortable. But I'm going to go into it with the idea that I want my game master to challenge that comfort because there's the story.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fine way to look at it. There actually is something that you said in there that it might not be exactly what you mean, what I'm about to say. So I think there's definitely some room for like discussion and like, oh, this isn't actually what I meant. It's funny when you say that monsters is where you find alignment to be most useful, because monsters is generally where I find a lot of alignment to have the most potential for problems, I'll say. I won't say it's automatically bad across the board. But personally, and again, this is something that might be controversial. So just to
he's calling dirty hot dog.
Hit me, baby.
I'm calling shenanigans. But I find the idea that like monsters, intelligent monsters especially, things that do have the capacity to think and speak and reason, for those things to be born automatically as an alignment, I think is something that's actually usually not great. To say that like this person is born chaotic evil or this monster is automatically lawful evil to its core, that there's like every single one of these things that exists is lawful evil because it's born like that. I think that it's just can start to bring in a lot of like unnecessary baggage, I think, into the game as far as morality goes, of just like the moment that you say things are born a certain way, that can start to lead down some dangerous paths as to like how you look at like morality and creatures in general in the world. And again, I'm not trying to say that if you do those things in your world that you're a bad person or whatever. It's complicated, obviously. But the whole idea that this thing is born good and this thing is born evil, I think is like a very dated idea from older editions that I would be very happy to see completely go away. That things should be able to decide how they want to act if they're intelligent and capable of doing so. So I find that the restrictions of like this creature is chaotic evil versus this creature is lawful good is, I think, one of the dangerous is such a loaded word. I don't want to say that, but it's the closest thing that like comes to mind of like, I think it paints morality the wrong way, that it confuses the system basically by saying that things are automatically this. And yeah, again, I know that that's controversial, that there are a lot of great worlds that have, you know, like Middle Earth is very static in its alignment of like orcs are born evil, elves are born good, and that's just how the world is. But like, and Middle Earth is great. I'm not trying to dog on Middle Earth, but that whole idea, I think, removes a lot of good nuance and good interest from like, well, what if you run into orcs and they are good people? Like, that should be a situation that should be allowed, I think. And it's just like a sort of, I guess with the term, to use a slightly political term, so again, sorry for controversy, of like what you would call like bioessentialism, that like a creature is born to be a certain thing, and that going against that is going against its nature. I think once you get into intelligent creatures, that has a lot of harmful accidental effects that I would like to see, at least in my personal worlds and my personal games, go away.
And I see that bioessentialism as something that is implied to most people, because Tim effectively read exactly what the rule was, and that didn't come up. And I think that's the important thing. And one thing that maybe I'd like for this video to do is, when it's helpful in stat blocks for me, is I think, well, that's what the monster is right now. That orc is evil, because I think that's the important thing. Separating this orc is evil from all orcs are evil, because you can very easily get into, okay, well, thought experiment. What if we took an orc in Middle Earth and had it raised by humans? You're like, okay, well, totally different thing because it's intelligent. And obviously then you get into the real human things of, oh, well, are these things taught? Are these things learned? Are these things inherent? Whatever. The other important thing is, I feel like the split of alignment that they decided to go with makes sense for why they made it. Tim, you mentioned the ethics and then their attitude toward sort of law and chaos, that spectrum. I find that interesting because as humans, and this is also sort of a philosophical idea that's not necessarily fact, so take this with a grain of salt. But as humans, philosophically, the idea is that we have to work to be good. It's a bit easier for humans to be bad in a way that's selfish. It's easier for me to not do the nice thing for somebody. Tim, you made the funny point where it's way easier for me to lay on my horn and be upset at the person in front of me because that morning they made a poor decision to look at their phone when maybe they got a really important text and the light was green. There's an argument for they shouldn't have been looking at their phone, but I'm mad at them knowing none of the context.
Right.
It's work for me to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's important to bring up because I feel like, especially in a fantasy game, if you look at it as a spectrum where both sides are equal, it's unfair because you generally have to work to be good. And it brings up a whole thing about, well, what about the evil guy that thinks he's doing something good by culling the population, say? Well, then you get into the idea that, well, my good is not the same as your good. And again, all of these points kind of break down the general system they used because of why they were doing it. So all of those things to say, I do my best not to use alignment in any case except for where it's very specific and important for the mechanics.
Sure.
Because it's something that is so much nuance, more than almost any other part of the game, and has so little mechanical explanation that that's why everybody talks about it so much.
Yeah, and I feel like...
And just to real quick,
go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Touch on a very specific part of that real quick, and then please go ahead. Of just like, I would be totally okay with the sort of stat block alignment thing, except for the fact that it's universal across the board of every single orc block in the 5th edition monster manual is evil. There's no orc in there that says like, this one is good. Like there is, I think, a sense to where the book does sort of reinforce that angle, even if it says like not every, in the alignment general section, like if every version of that monster always has that same alignment, then it does sort of reinforce that sort of view that they are automatically base that, which I think is part of where I don't want to get too lost in like the very specific minutia.
No, but I think
of, like stat block layout, but yeah.
And I hear that, and that's where like, so two things. The first thing is like you're making a solid point where it's like, it does say if you look at every one, they're evil. In the little alignment section in the monster manual, it calls it a clue to its disposition, but it's like, if the clue is they're evil, it's like, oh, I've solved the mystery of the orcs.
Yeah. And specifically, I meant like if I make a stat block
and
I write good on that orc,
Yeah, and so I also want to say that, so, we have Dragongrin, a campaign world that all of us are intimately familiar with because we've written it. I think we've gone out of our way to actually just crush that entirely. So let's bring it to this. Why does it matter? We're deep in the weeds. It's 30 minutes into this video. Like, you guys are getting pretty philosophical on me. Well, let me help you make an interesting game. Let me help you make a really interesting game. If the players have to approach a creature in the world and they don't know where they stand on anything other than based on their behavior, it makes it so that their course of action is nuanced. It's deliberate, and they have to make decisions like they would in any real world. So it's not just like, it's orcs. All right, you take the right flank, and and the orcs are automatically trying to kill them. So that's the thing. That's what we're talking about. It's not just, this isn't just a discussion about philosophy. It's a discussion about how do you make every encounter interesting. It's that you don't know what the creature thinks, believes, wants, and things like that. And so in Dragongrin, there are dragons that have, we'll just say that they're living. They're not. But the way that a dragon is, their color has nothing to do with their demeanor or their abilities. That's just circumstantial. What does have to do with their abilities is how they act, what their goals are, what they want. So you could run into a red dragon and they would actually be benevolent and great. And so to me, the reason why we made that design choice is because it adds a sense of wonder back into the dragon. There is a level of meta information that every player brings into the game. That's fine. It's a game. But it's so much cooler and more interesting when you have to go, oh, this huge dragon. What do we do? Well, I don't know. Let's find some clues. And now they're critically thinking as players. That's why alignment matters to me. Because if not, everything is just this static, like Jeff, like you said, like, oh, well, here go the evil orcs. Burn down their village. It becomes less of checking off a checklist of what you do and expected behaviors, and becomes more of a world.
Yeah, and I think that sort of like nuanced approach that you mentioned is like, just as far as a practical thing, as far as like just making the game more exciting, I think just that alone, at least for me, is reason enough to kind of go down that route of, like you say, like you come across a band of orcs, are these the orcs that are, roaming around burning and killing anything they find? Or are these, just trying to live their lives and, be as, minimal impact they can on the world around them and just, gather the resources that they need to live, hunt for food, whatever. And if you don't know, you have to find out or take action and suffer the moral consequences of finding out that you were wrong, which I think is way, way, way more interesting as a player than just like, oh, that thing is definitely evil, so we're definitely doing a good thing by killing it. Like, it removes a lot of questions, and questions that you would, like, I feel in some sense that it gives it even less dignity than, like, finding wild animals, where it's like, if you find a bear, it at least might be docile, like, in that moment. It might not, like, be literally trying to kill you, so let's just leave the bear alone, We don't need to fight it. We don't need to, it's fine. It's not bothering us. We're not bothering it. We'll just go around. But then you find the orcs, which can talk, and think. And then you're just like, oh, well, they're evil, so we'll kill them all. Like, yeah, there's a sort of like strange moment there of like, where it's like, no, like you should be able to come across, good orcs and good red dragons and evil silver dragons or whatever, like that. The idea that these things are not defined by what they're born as, I think, other than just being a personal philosophical hill that I will die on as a human being, like that's just something that I believe, which I'll put out there. It makes for more interesting scenarios in games where you have, like you say, you have to sort of start to dig in of like, okay, well, if we're going to talk to them and figure out their disposition, then we're giving up ambush effectiveness if we do need to fight them. But if we fight them and they turn out to be good, then we've made a mistake, by attacking them, which I think is like, just, it adds more tactical depth. It adds more moral depth. It makes these alignments actually mean something, where you have to actually kind of walk the walk if you're going to do it. Like, you don't just get to kill everything you find and still call yourself good. Like, being good doesn't mean anything if it's never challenged. Like, I think you guys were saying before, of like, the GM should start to poke at what alignment you are. If you're lawful and you're good, then give them scenarios where they have to actually decide if they're going to stay that or not, and poke at it. And you don't poke at it if there's no complexity to the violence that you inflict as part of that alignment stake, because it's so clear cut what everything is or isn't.
And you start to get into, at this point, deciding what you want your games to be, or if you were, say, creating a system, what you want your system to be. Because alignment is a very gamey fixture in the sense that if you know in your world all orcs are bad, it does remove that question. You know those orcs are bad. But actually bringing it back to Dragongrin, there are multiple different cultures and different types of orcs that believe different things. And there are certainly some that would kill you on sight. And there are others that you might be able to talk to or have some rapport with. And in that sense, I feel like moving away from alignment and more toward more nuanced things is better. I love the idea of a game where you don't know anyone's alignment, because if you meet someone on the street, you don't know anyone's alignment. Obviously, where I live in the US, I don't know. I don't think that needs to be qualified. I'm not in constant danger of the person across the street from me. And it's a little different in a world where, there's fantasy and these could be bad people, but those are some of my favorite experiences. I ran a game where the players the whole time were effectively trying to reanimate this cyborg style creature. And then it was awakened and it didn't do anything. And so one of the players, I don't remember if he asked this specifically, but he was like, well, what's its alignment? And I'm like, well, you don't know anything about this creature. What do you want to do? Do you want to attack it? Do you want to try to talk to it? It's basically waiting for you to make the first move. And specifically this player, but in general, it was kind of a new situation where it's like, this isn't a trick. This isn't a puzzle. What are your characters going to do now that you've done the thing you've been trying to do this whole time? It's not clear cut. And it created a sort of cool situation because they didn't know what to do, and it's like, well, that's where it can be fun. That's some of the most fun I have in like the Fallout video games, because there's so much of that morality in the gray area. Even in that, sometimes you can get away with like, oh, if I target them, is their name red or green? Okay, they're probably bad because it's red. But removing that, you're like, any person in the world could try to kill you. And that's so much fun.
So, Jeff, any final thoughts on alignment? Anything that you want to throw out there is kind of like, maybe hammer home or something new?
Yeah, at the end of the day, for me, I'll just, say again that I think the world is almost always more rich, more sensible in a good way, and more fun to be in when alignment is not something that's taken for granted by any one person or creature, that it's something that, like James says, you have to figure out about them through interacting with them and making a decision. That, to me, I'll always take over, like, all these or this, all that or those, basically any day. For me, and again, that's my personal belief for the games that I like to play in. But at the end of the day, for both the characters that I play and the things that I interact with in the world, anytime you can add more depth and more complexity to alignment, which is not necessarily built to be super nuanced, I think that makes things better. Even if it takes more effort, I think the effort is worth it for the product that it ends up creating in terms of the worlds and in terms of the characters that you get to play and interact with.
Yeah, I think it was well said. And, I think alignment is from a time where it was important that for the game, things were classified. And there was a good stretch of time where Dungeons and Dragons was a war game that was fantasy. And it was more about, it was specifically go get treasure, bring treasure back. It was a game. It was very do X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to try to kill you while you do it. And I think it's evolved so much. And now some of my favorite stories that exist are from tabletop role-playing games. And that rivals any cinema or book or television show or any other video game. Some of my very favorite stories that have come about. And so I think evolving it as a storytelling medium is where it comes down to, like you said, Jeff, it's a matter of preference. There is really no wrong answer with this, but it's something to consider. And my challenge would just be, if you are going to use alignment, then for each creature, roll that die. Roll that die we talked about in the short form video. Just give them an opportunity. Because to me, subverting tropes is like thoroughly my jam. I just love doing that because it's so much more interesting. It's how new tropes are made anyway. So the constant evolution would be if I say, all right, here are the evil orcs. If that's how you want to play, then that's cool. Like, have fun, play your game. I just challenge you that every once in a while saying, hey, these good orcs are actually being framed by the village the villagers are bad. At least this people that are in charge, the top 4 or 5 people are doing bad things. And then they are actually making it look like it was the orcs. Well, now you got yourself a crazy interesting story. And there's no, oh, well, I know what to do. Because the orcs are bad, we have to figure out how to kill them, and then we'll get the gold from the king. And it's like, if that's a story you want to play, no worries. That's not the story I want to play. Because it's been played over and over and over again. I want to make a new one. So the thing that I would say is, now you have this interesting thing. And the people under the 4 or 5 village leaders who are not bad, and they're like, hey, we're too scared to say anything. Maybe they're the ones that reach out to the heroes. Like, hey, we'll get killed. So there you go. I just made an adventure. But it's based off of not predicating, like Jeff, like you said, that a specific creature is going to act a certain way. So that would kind of be my final thoughts on alignment, which is just give everybody a fair shake, because if for nothing else, you're going to have more interesting games. So this discussion was, I think, really cool. I really enjoyed it. But we want to know, like, what do you think about all this? It can be a hot button topic, so this will be the filter that I push everything through. What do you think will make your games more interesting? What do you think will make your games better? I'm not interested in debating whether or not it's right or wrong as a concept. Because if our goal, what's the heavy G, to make cooler, better games. So what about the way that you do alignment or play with alignment makes your games better? That's what I want to hear. Not whether or not we're right or wrong. Feel free to tell us that also. But throw that in the comments. What do you use alignment for to make your games better? We're Tabletop Terrors. We love fun, creativity, and RPGs. Today, a little bit of philosophy, but that's okay. If you like any of those things, hit the subscribe button so that you'll know when we post new videos, especially with the notification bell. And I guess let's all do a Tabtarian toast together. What do you say?
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte. No sláinte from Jeff? You just gonna no sláinte me? You don't have to. Listen.
It's funny because I feel like
if you want to be neutral on sláinte,
I do feel like it makes more sense for us to each do our own thing, right? Like
I don't know, had never considered
right.
no sláinte, but I guess that's Jeff subverting tropes.
The other thing I was thinking was, I don't know if he's morally against them, but I haven't seen Jeff drink an energy drink either. So I'm like, well, he's doing his own thing, you know? There's nothing wrong with that, but
that is a conversation for another time.